Hi there, my name is Jeffrey Venture, and this is my D&Dify It series, where I take all your favorite TV shows, movies, and other popular media and turn them into Dungeons & Dragons adventures. On this channel, however, we do tend to leave the low-hanging fruit that is your Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and other major franchises to the literal hundreds who have built entire game systems around these stories. So in this video covering Frozen 2, I'm hoping that this is the first time that you're thinking about running an adventure set in the Kingdom of Arendelle, and I hope that this gives you some good ideas for how to run an adventure set in this really fun world at your own table. Also, players, you don't need to worry, it's totally cool if you're here, watch the whole video, and then send it off to your game master, because your game master will likely have more tricks up their sleeve than what we're going to be talking about in this video. The focus of these videos is on the fun parts, like story theme and adventure structure, so you'll be hearing about the setting, character options, and a tiny sampling of the monsters you might face. This means you game masters can take the ideas presented here and make them your own, filling in the spaces that I intentionally blank and putting your own twist on the things I give a number of options for. With all that in mind, I'm hoping that you game masters feel both equipped and excited to run these, hopefully, fun games at your own tables. Also, I love tabletop RPGs and games in general that allow a much younger audience to enjoy them without being exposed to adult themes. So if you're here and planning to run this game for a number of little ones, know that I am so excited to have you here. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's jump right in and D&Dify Frozen 2. First of all, I've got to give you the standard spoiler warning. We want to be able to pull from the full range of lore, magical powers, magical creatures, and everything else from both of the films, in fact, and I will be using the primary conflict of Frozen 2 as a catalyst for the entire adventure. That's actually the reason why we're starting with Frozen 2 and not the first film, but if there's enough demand, I would be happy to go back and make a video for Frozen 1. Alright, so this is your last chance. Go back and watch the films if you haven't already, and then we'll go into the unknown. Nobody wants to hear that. Player characters. I'm actually planning to spend the majority of the video talking about player characters because I think those decisions will greatly inform the rest of the adventure. I particularly say this because of the North Ultra Tribe, which should give us a much broader variety of playable characters than we would be if we were only pulling from the kind of main protagonists of the films. So we've got a Frost Mage with Elsa, a Conjured Familiar with Olaf, a Beastmaster Ranger with Kristoff, and his elk animal companion in Sven. And then of course there's Anna. Sorry, Anna, maybe you're the charming bard, but we've practically got an adventuring party right there. With that in mind, I feel the need to say that I don't ever want these videos to imply that someone gets to play Elsa in this circumstance, or that someone gets to play Olaf. If portraying an established character sounds fun to you or someone at your table, then go for it. But I've personally never been interested in doing the same for a character that someone's done a much better job at portraying than me. I'm far more interested in silly caricatures of classic archetypes for the most part, because I'm much better at being a dork than I am being a serious character. So to avoid that, we may want to loosen the lore a little bit to allow other elemental sorcerer types like Elsa, and also probably allow druids as a playable class if you, again, are looking at the North Ultra Tribe. The important part about making these changes feel thematically appropriate and at home in the game that you end up running is making sure that they fit into the story that you're telling, which honestly is a bit more work than we would typically do for what is most likely going to be a one-shot. So again, if we've got like an Elsa archetype, maybe if we could establish like a secondary kingdom or something around those lines so that a princess or prince, which is always an option, could be an embodiment of this other elemental type, pulling from fire, air, earth, or water. This would be especially great if you're planning to run a birthday game, in which case the birthday girl or boy can be the Elsa archetype and the rest of the party can be her entourage. And remember, there's plenty of fun to be had while playing the sidekick, just to look at Olaf. Alright, so let's sum it up. What typical fantasy character classes are we thinking about playing with? Well, sorcerers are the obvious choice for our Elsa archetype. I think an argument could be made for them to be a wizard or a warlock instead. We've got a decent case for druids existing with the North Ultra Tribe and the Enchanted Forest, as well as rangers, though particularly the Beastmaster variety, taking a look at, again, Kristoff and Sven. I was joking about Anna being a bard before, but honestly that sounds super fun, so I'd totally allow it at my table. For spellcasters, that leaves the humble cleric and paladin, which I think you could easily fit into your games, but I would consider pulling from the options for both of those classes, that you can have their power come from nature itself. So looking at the nature cleric domain and the Oath of Ancients paladin is something I highly recommend. And then of course we've got our non-magic characters, our fighters, monks, barbarians, and rogues, which can usually be placed into any story without needing to alter it too much. I would recommend you go on this adventure with fairly low-level characters, it's starting at maybe 1st, 3rd, or 5th at most, at least by 5th edition standards. Frozen is kind of low to medium fantasy for how it manifests in the world, and while I anticipate that we're going to have a fairly magical party, I think we should keep it fairly simple when it comes to spells and other magical effects. Theme and adventure ideas. So as I mentioned before, I've already got an idea of how I'd like to build this adventure based on the primary conflict of Frozen 2, which I would use to build a man versus nature type of adventure. This should also help us keep everything a bit PG, if that's something that you're considering, because the nature that we're going to be fighting is going to be these elementals, which I'll detail in the Monsters and Challenges section in a little bit here. But that helps us avoid a bit more of the adult themes that can come along with fighting humanoids. I also went in this direction because I really like the concept that the essence of fundamental elements can manifest as feeling and thinking beings that both subtly interact with and dramatically retaliate to those that enter their domain. This seems like a really neat opportunity to play in a living, breathing forest that has these roaming elementals that the adventuring party must appease, avoid, or incapacitate. The backstory for the adventure that I've been imagining throughout all of this could be something that stirs these elementals, that eventually spreads and causes havoc to a nearby settlement, which of course prompts our adventuring party to do something about it. I'm also thinking that I would use the primary conflict between the Arendelian soldiers and the Northuldran tribe as a catalyst for whatever upset nature. If we have characters from both camps, we're probably going to have to establish some sort of partnership, or that they, maybe ran into each other while attempting to achieve the same task, or we can put them like literally directly in the story at a point where it makes sense that they'd be working together. And I think this encompasses our timeline for where this adventure needs to take place. If you're going with anything close to what I'm thinking, we're going to have to put this adventure chronologically before or during the events of Frozen 2, but not after they break the dam, which is okay, because that's the end of the film. Gameplay elements. So here's what I'm thinking for the last bits of the adventure structure that we haven't covered yet. I would start with the characters knowing about the disturbance in the Enchanted Forest and plop them right down in the exploration phase of your average adventure. For seasoned adventurers, this is the point where you can get right to the action. But for brand new players, I would personally take them to meet some of the more friendly denizens of the forest first. I think a run-in with the tricksy wind elemental would be really fun, but perhaps we first start them off by talking to some awakened trees and or a tree ant to help give them some information and, gives them someone to talk to. Eventually, or firstly, if we're getting right into the action, we should definitely run into some less friendly denizens. These spirits of the forest, these elementals, can be an obstacle on the way towards investigating the disturbance in the forest, or they can be there actually causing the disturbance itself, or both. Just keep in mind that if these encounters mean combat, that more than one planned combat while you're doing your planning phases can greatly extend the length of your adventure, and I would very much recommend looking at tactics for how to make those fights a bit more bite-sized, a bit more manageable by doing things like allowing the first wave to run away and maybe be encountered a little bit later on in the adventure, or have them just be pushovers and be a really short fight. Then we get to the disturbance itself, whether that's a raging forest fire, a contagion in the water, or what have you, where we consequently will calm the blaze, will cleanse the water, and restore tranquility to the forest in whatever way makes sense for the adventure that you've ended up running. Oh, and throughout this entire adventure, I feel like it barely even needs to be said that you need to be playing Frozen music, whether that's the actual tracks or instrumentals, throughout this adventure. If this idea is just now striking you, that is the most important piece of advice that I could possibly give you in this entire video. Monsters and challenges. Like I was alluding to before, elementals. And the standard elementals presented in the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual from pretty much any edition, I think, are great templates for where to start with these. Minor tweaks, of course, are going to make these nice and flavorful, and there's something to consider with the power level that they're currently presented at, and given that we're working with fairly low-level characters, you're probably going to need to adjust their power level accordingly. 5th edition has them set to challenge rating 5, that's for all of the elementals. Air, earth, fire, and water are all challenge rating 5, which means that they are, of course, appropriate for a party of 5th level adventurers, so debuff them accordingly. Perhaps debuff them a lot, in fact, because I think we're going to want to stack a couple of abilities on top of what these standard elementals already have to tie in a little bit closer to the behaviors of the elementals that we see in the films. The wind seems to play tricks, the earth seems solid and powerful, the water seems majestic, and fire is also tricksy, but like in a different way, like kind of more mischievous, I guess. You game masters can take these behaviors and features and turn them into tangible abilities that make sense for the game that you're playing and the challenge that you want to present your players. And regardless of the system that you're using, I'd very much recommend looking at other creatures to borrow features from, because that can really add that nice homebrew twist that is going to make these creatures feel thematically appropriate as well as very cohesive in their functionality. I would go with some limited invisibility while these elementals are in their native element, you know, them being able to blend in with the fire or the water that they're close to. And there's a number of other niche abilities that I think you could pull from, pulling on my 5th edition knowledge anyway, with things like illusory magic, perhaps teleportation, and I think in some circumstances a charm effect may even be appropriate. For 5th edition play, I would also recommend looking at lair actions, making some homebrew ones, I would think, to allow these elementals to have some control over their environment. There may also be room for certain beasts based on what happens in the adventure or how you build it, as well as some humanoid stat blocks. I'm thinking things like scout and soldier kind of stuff. If you end up having an NPC encounter with Arendelian forces or Northuldrin at some point in the adventure. I think this is a setting where we're going to want to keep it pretty PG, almost regardless of the circumstances. So I'm hoping that we're pulling from the non-combat stats for the few circumstances in which those mechanics are going to be important for the course of gameplay. With this in mind, I'd encourage you, game masters, to reward and encourage players who find good alternatives to violence in dealing with the obstacles that you put in front of them. All right, my Arendelians and Northuldrins, let's go ahead and generate our adventure prompt. I usually give my players a full adventure handout that includes a prompt like the one that I'm about to give you in written form, which includes things like character starting level, a few parameters based on the game system that we're using if we're gonna, allow certain classes and races kind of things, an allowance if they need to spend that on weapons and armor, magic item allowance, very important as well, and any other parameters that I can think of that will give them the ideas that they need for building their characters. If this is your first time considering an adventure where players might come in with a magic item or two, I would recommend, at the minimum, giving them one common magic item by 5th edition standards anyway, because that really helps the players give their characters just a little extra touch of flavor beyond what their race, class, background, whatever can give them. Even if you're the one creating the character sheets for the players at your table, looking at you dungeon dads out there, I think it's still a good idea to have an adventure prompt, whether you use the one I'm about to give you or one that more accurately reflects the adventure that you end up running, because I think that can generate some real excitement and also get the little minds into the right imaginative headspace to hopefully do at least a little bit of role-playing in the game that you're about to play. Okay, so here's the prompt that I would give my players for this adventure. You are a band of adventurers. Companions brought together from all walks of life, hailing from Arendelle, Northuldra, or perhaps a kingdom far, far away. You currently find yourselves on an urgent mission to the enchanted forest outside the kingdom of Arendelle. The mysterious and mercurial spirits of the enchanted forest have been stirred and must be calmed if Arendelle is ever to find peace again. Keep your friends close and be wary in the forest. While minor spirits enjoy tricks and minor illusions, the most ancient spirits that dwell there are dangerous indeed. Be careful, have fun, and don't get lost in the woods. In this one shot, based on Frozen 2. That's the end of the adventure prompt. So for you players, the game masters that get sent this from their players, and for those of you planning a kid's birthday party, I think you could have a real blast playing a Frozen 2 adventure. These movies do such a good job at building a magical and mystical world that kids of all ages, including yours truly, can get fully immersed in. And I think it's going to be a ton of fun to play an adventure in this setting if you end up giving it a shot. I'd love to hear what you think about running or playing an adventure like this in the comments section down below. Send this to your game master, and pretty please, especially for this one, send me stories, send me pictures on my Twitter or Instagram if you end up running this at your table. All right, everyone, that was Frozen 2 D&Dified. Like I was saying, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, handles down there, where I'd also like to hear what else you would have liked to hear me talk about in this video. I'll be making a D&Dified adventure module for one of these videos per month, so if you end up watching this in the current month, August 2020, head on over to Twitter, cast your vote to have Frozen 2 get the D&Dified adventure module treatment. For YouTube, a like and subscribe is always appreciated, and hit that bell icon if you want to be notified for these weekly videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy adventuring.